Okay, I want to welcome everyone, and I have a handy dandy lapel mic on, so I think it's working. You can hear it? Okay. Huge crowd. I love the excitement. Woo! Next year, Linda McCauley, our Chief Accounting Officer, who is also responsible for much of what we do in our Fiscal Services Department, decided she might buy scratcher tickets out of her own funding and offer them as prizes here. So maybe we'll see about something like that. Not this year, but maybe next year. Okay, well, we didn't know how many would show up. I was telling some folks earlier, the idea of these budget forums is simply to make them available. If anyone's interested in understanding how we basically start to build our budget each year, in the spring of each year for the next fiscal year, July through June, they can understand that a little bit better. They can have a chance to ask questions if anyone has questions, or give a little input, and we can explain how the process works. And that's what I'm going to do today. Hopefully I won't bore you. I'm Christine Staton. I'm the Vice President of Administrative Services, and I'm fairly new here, so some of this I'm still learning as we go along. But we want to at least share this information with you. I worked with our budget committee, which is one of our new governance bodies here, or it's been around, but it's functioning in a new manner, following our resource allocation manual, which is one of our governance manuals. And part of our budget committee duties were to work a little bit back and forth. How are we establishing our assumptions? Because there's certain things we know about our budget, and they're just going to carry forward into the next year. But there's other things we don't know, and we have to make some assumptions and assume based upon what the governor has told us in his January budget proposal. And how do we translate those into what our budget may look like for next year, and what do I and Linda and Leangela use as we build the budget. So today there's going to be some accounting jargon, and there's going to be a couple spreadsheets. I hope I don't bore you with them. But I thought I'd start with, what did the governor propose in January for 1450 for our budget? And these are the state budget proposal highlights, and they're what we're using we will use to build our assumptions. You need to know that in May, there's something called the May revise. The governor comes out, takes this budget, a lot of the back and forth he's had with legislature, and he proposes a May revision. So some of this could change, and we'll keep you apprised. And then we will make the needed changes in our budgeting process to account for those, and keep the budget committee involved as well. But access used to be called growth. Access is 3% for next year to restore basically access for students. What that means is we're going to be getting approximately $1.2 million if we do get that 3% for COS. And that enables us primarily to increase our faculty obligation number, or our full-time faculty on staff, and offer more classes and give more access to the students. So though, when the governor pronounced this, he said the budget will give priority to districts identified as having the greatest unmet need in adequately serving their community's higher educational needs. We don't know what that means, and we don't know if COS will qualify as one of the communities with the higher needs. So will we get a whole 1.2 million? Another trick that I just learned, actually, they've never really done this at the state level, but they just did it recently with a final calculation for 12-13, is instead of giving you 3% of your credit classes, they put all your new dollars toward non-credit, or increase the FTES for non-credit, and something like that could bring us less dollars as well. But we're making a more positive assumption here. COLA, this is one that if you're familiar with it, we like that number. It's called Cost of Living Adjustment. Usually it is given to state agencies to accommodate needed raises, really. It's not to cover step and column cost increases. But if there's going to be raises, it's not a direct correlation at all, because other needs increase, other costs decrease. But COLA is for a cost of living adjustment, and the governor proposed 0.86%. Something you might want to know, I was highly disappointed when I saw 0.86%, because Proposition 98, which was passed in the late 70s, is what drives funding for K-12 and community colleges. And Prop 98 is a calculation done at the state level, and then they in turn divide that up and deliver the funds to schools and community colleges. Prop 98 received an increase of over 11% for 14-15, the highest in history. And so to get this small of a COLA is interesting. What it means is that our government is saying, we're going to give you more money, but we're going to really direct the pockets that it goes to, and we're not going to give you what we would generally call unrestricted dollars. Although access is also unrestricted. Access just is intended for growing your programs and bringing more students in. Student success, used to be called matriculation, is actually restricted. We can only use it for items that are allowable in that program. He allocated $100 million to 2 different pots each, so $200 million total. One for student success, which we think if they do their calculations similar to how they've done them in the past, we'll get $240,000 to advance and strengthen our student success programs. Student equity plans could be another $100 million. They haven't given any inkling as to how they're going to calculate that, and it's the first time they've funded something like that. So we'll wait. It could be another $240,000, we're hopeful. Student equity plans are something our Student Services Department is working on developing, and the state is giving us funding to go along with it. Scheduled maintenance and instructional equipment. Some of you might be a little bit familiar with this. Eric Middlestead, our facilities director, is very familiar with the scheduled maintenance, but those are 2 pots of money that the state usually sends us each year. Scheduled maintenance is your maintenance and kind of your deferred maintenance for your facilities. Instructional equipment is for all those instructional items that you may not have good ongoing sources of funding for, so the state then sends you money. Used to be, I think they send us about $100,000 in each pot, or maybe in a good year, $200,000. This year, they're talking $650,000. So remember all that money? They're directing a lot of it very specifically in a restricted manner. $650,000 is good, but we'll talk in a minute about how we have to turn around and make a match for that. We have to make a 1-to-1 match for scheduled maintenance and 2-to-1, unless it's 3-to-1 for instructional equipment. Do you remember? 3-to-1. So, and instructional equipment is usually not too hard to match because we take all those other dollars we spend on our instructional programs and we can utilize those. Scheduled maintenance is harder to match because we don't have a magic pot of money. Deferrals, you might be familiar with the state deferring our revenue, or they also call it deferments, but in most recent years, I think it was an accounting anomaly, because I'm an accountant, I'm a CPA, and if you called something an expense, if the state called something an expense, you had to pay it that year. You had to book a liability. The first year they thought of this, they thought, this is how we're going to balance our budget. We're going to tell the schools and the community colleges we're going to give them their money, but we're not going to really give it to them. And not only that, we're not going to book a liability. So that's what those things were. We had to book a receivable, but the state did not book a payable. And so we got to the point where over 40% of the dollars we should be receiving in a given fiscal year were not being given to us. It was an IOU that they would give us, and then they would give it to us the next year. And the same thing would happen the next year. Well, they're finally paying on their IOUs. So that's what this is, and it's $235 million. Plus another $1 million of one-time funds, so some ongoing funds, some one-time funds, and they're basically bringing all those deferrals back to 0. That sounds great because it does give us more cash, but it doesn't give us any more revenue or no new funds that we can use to add programs or anything. We kept our programs, we just booked a receivable, and we kept that came into our books as a revenue, and we just kept moving along. So anyway, we will be in a better cash position, which we're very thankful for. This is the second year that they've paid down on deferrals, and they really did it quickly, and they're taking care of that. I think we were up over $10 million in deferrals at one time. Prop 39 is a proposition we all passed in November 12, I think, for energy efficiency projects in the state. They, in turn, are giving us approximately $300,000 a year. Eric and I were just discussing this the other day, how it's supposed to be for 5 years, and we're good for our first year. Maybe okay for second year, we're waiting to hear, but the state may come back and lower those amounts. But we are working on specific projects that meet those criteria for those funds. This is where I might get a little detailed. try and walk you through it. If anyone would like a copy of this, just email me, Christine Staton or Christine S., or call me or something. I'll shoot you an email, shoot you a copy. But what we have here is, where is our budget today at this point in time for 13-14? This is our actual budget. What would it look like for 14-15 under these assumptions that we've just talked about? And what other assumptions do we want to build in? Do we need to build in? That's some of the things that the Budget Committee talked about. And lastly, projecting out a year for purposes of fiscal solvency. What might it look like in 15-16? Will things be better? Will things be worse? The main reason we did that was to make sure we would be solvent. In fact, as we adopt our budget, if we follow the same pattern, this will become our new budget, and then we'll project out to 16-17 as well. But what we have is our state allocation. We have new dollars that were allocated to us, and this is just shown as a line item to let you know for comparison purposes what was new for 13-14. That includes, the actual calculation is $1.785 million, but we included a $100,000 deficit because they always deficit us. They never give us 100% of what they say. No one knows what that deficit is, but we talk back and forth with the state and try and narrow it down to the most realistic possibility. I mentioned that because I didn't build in any deficits here. Miscellaneous revenue and mandate reimbursement. This is what this year is, a little bit lower for the next 2 years. Some accounting things, primarily bad debts. The state asked us to move up to the revenue as a contra instead of in the expense and things like that. And there's our revenues. Now, if you take these two and add back that 100,000, those will add to that number. So if you can see how things carry forward. If you take these two, it'll add to 15-16 state revenue. Likewise, when you take the total expenditures, that'll come up and be the base for the next year. So that's our assumptions, that we just keep our programs in place and move forward. We're not really in a cutting mode right now. I think we've all survived that for the last 5 years. So besides those revenues, we have step column, some utility increases, other types of increases that are inherent to every year that we do business. And I'll give you more detail on that in a minute. This year, they're already built into the budget, but what are those for next year and the year out? We have almost $685,000 and $540,000, and again, I'll get to the detail in a minute. Through our bond funds, we paid off a certificate of participation, which is a long-term debt. It was a decision to basically help our general fund because our general fund pays for this long-term debt, but it was allowable out of the bond, being one of the items mentioned in the bond and planned to be paid out of the bond in some future years. We just had to get those bond funds expended. So that's going to save us, when you combine these two amounts, it's basically just less than $250,000 every year. That was one of the things through Budget Committee discussions. We need to build that in. We need to account for that. Lower TRAN, we are also not taking out a tax revenue anticipation note. Big old debt we would take out, short-term debt every year, just to make do because the state wasn't giving us their money. So we are not going to need what's called a TRAN next year, now that the deferrals or the deferments are gone. So we get to save about $100,000. It came in just a little under $100,000 in interest expense. We need to expend a few extra dollars to get to larger summer schools this year, and summer 14, part of that falls in next year's budget. And then we'll bump back and have a slightly smaller summer school in 15-16. So you see more dollars this year, less next year. We're looking at basically 600 FTES for this summer is what we're targeting. And we will only target probably 275, maybe less than half of that in a normal summer. So, and then we have our fawn. You saw that where I had that 1.2 million, I said it'll primarily be used for fawn. The state unfroze the fawn, and so I don't know if you followed that Frozen fawn. It didn't follow the movie Frozen, so I won't sing for you, but they had frozen the fawn, and now they've unfrozen it, which means, hey, community colleges, you now need to meet this faculty obligation number. So we have to add 8 faculty for this year. We're actually adding 9 total. 8 are general fund, and 1 will be out of a categorical fund for this year. But the 8 out of the general fund, unrestricted, we have a few small bits and pieces of adjunct that'll go away, and I think a couple hours of a counselor. We were able to come up with about $50,000, but the rest the general fund's going to have to pay for. So that's a large, very large new expense, a large assumption. The next year, this is assuming that categorical is only funded for 1 year, so we know we're going to have to pick up $100,000 this year. I just threw in one more fawn. That could be much higher. We don't know what the state will have a year down the road. Tulare Provost, EOP&S, and other savings, there's some administration costs that are going up and down, but we need to either plug in the additional cost for a Tulare Provost this year, or that could move, part of that, $120,000 of that could move to the next year. When Larry Dudo does finally retire for the second time, he's only getting paid a small portion of what a normal provost cost is because he's on our retirement benefit as well. So there'll be a very real cost there that we'll have to meet. EOP&S has now told us that we can no longer function on a 50% director. We have to fund a 100% director. We're trying to figure out how best to accommodate that cost. And then there's a little bit savings with some savings from a shift in our fiscal services management that we've made. So you get to your total expenditures, and you either have a surplus or a deficit. I call this basically break even. A small deficit like that isn't going to concern me. It's probably not going to concern the board or the Tulare County Office of Education or the Chancellor's Office that provides some oversight for us. Because at the end of the year, you also have dollars go unspent. Everyone's account lines are meant to say, this is your budget. You can't go over it, but no one ever spends them perfectly. So a few dollars drop unspent at the end of the year. And we will be using those, to put into our fund balance. But in this year, this could be the really good year. But it also, who knows? I just put in $1.4 million. I went a little conservative. If we got 1.685 this year, if we get 1.5 next year, what might it be the year out? So if we didn't get that 1.4, if the state said, sorry, we have no money for you, suddenly this whole surplus could go away. So, or most of it. So we will keep everyone posted and let information be utilized and revise our assumptions and our budgets as needed. So that's basically the assumptions in a nutshell. I'll give you a little more detail. Any questions on this part right now? Okay, you guys are good. You're hanging with me. Okay. These are some, when you saw step and column costs, cost of 1%, and health and welfare increases. Just so you know, the cost of 1% is here for information only. That was not built into those assumptions. So it's kind of important to know, when you're building assumptions, you're basically building your known commitments. We don't know what the negotiations table will produce in terms of any raises or commitments with the collective bargaining agreements. But if we were to, just so you know the dollars, these are the totals. That is unrestricted only, but if you took all of our accounts, that would be our total. So about $330,000. And so if you offered a 2%, it would cost our district $660,000. It's just some math to kind of see how the numbers play out. Step and column is a known. That's a commitment per our collective bargaining agreements. And this, this is closer to unrestricted only. We just got a new calculation in because basically we recalculate as we know our staff about every couple months. And this might be closer to 385 or 390. But that's the unrestricted portion of step and column costs. Health and welfare, who knows? But what we have here is we took the last 4 years' averages. What were the increases? They averaged to 5.66%. Then we took a known commitment, which is a 50% increase of whatever the increase is, to pay for CSEA, because that was agreed to at the close of negotiations last year. And that's that amount, if that was the calculation. And then the board, as the board was accepting that agreement, the board came back with a decision to also offer the same thing to management, and that's that 50% cost. COSAFA does not have health and welfare benefits. COSTA if it was known, we could put it in here. And very soon we may need to, but they've not been at the negotiations table. There's been a PERB issue that everyone's been waiting for. And there will be a very real cost there. We just don't know what it is now. So there's no number to put on paper. So you saw 110,000 on that prior slide. In fact, I might go back. I take it back. You haven't seen it yet. It's built into the next one. So this is where I got that 685,000 and that 540 when you go 2 years. You have your step and column, your health and welfare that I just talked about. Unknown, we don't know what the commitment is the year out, so we're not putting anything in there. Insurance workers' comp is going up quite a bit next year. This is our actual cost. That's the estimated increase. Unfortunately, it's a 10% increase, and our 5-year average is only, our 3-year average is only 5%, so it's a big increase. Property and liability is estimated at 15 to 20% increase. We don't need that much because we're actually over budgeted. Our actuals were over 600,000 last year, and our actuals this year are targeted at 553. So fortunately, we have 50,000 in there to eat up the increased cost, but we'll still need another 20 to get there. Water, I put this in because I was afraid about the cost of water. And then I thought it might be good to share with you folks. We are on wells for Visalia and Tulare, and Hanford's the only one that is metered and that we pay. So I only put a small amount in there if that's needed. Otherwise, escalators for technology agreements, this is something we just need to budget for because they're built into our contracts. And I think we have about 8 different agreements, and that's what it calculated out to, a 4% escalator. Election costs are put in. This was some discussion back and forth with our budget committee. But we basically have elections every other year, but we haven't regularly budgeted for them in the most recent years. And the reality is it's going to be $140,000 next year. It's a very expensive process. We're talking with the county elections office and trying to make sure we understand every part of their proposal. But the budget committee thought, well, let's budget $70,000 this year and $70,000 the next year as we discussed it. Yes. It's in there. Let me show you. See that step and column right there? 400,000. And, oh, you are right. It is not there. It might need to be added. That's a very good question. Do they have step and column? Okay. I'm sorry, where did I go? Confidentials are combined in there. Yeah, so that's why it's good to have these discussions. I need to go look up that number and add that in. So I don't know what, Linda's here and we might need to look. You don't have any idea. Okay. And that's probably my error and just being new and not knowing that they had step. So they do have step. Do they have column as well? Step, okay. That's something we'll look into and add in, and that would slightly increase that. Unless, I mentioned our latest recalculation was 385 to 390, unless that covers that. I don't know. But that would be an amount to add in right there. Thank you. Okay, there's just a couple other quick slides, and then we're basically done. But what are some of the assumptions that we've discussed? What are others that we need to add in? Election costs are included, I mentioned that. Non-resident, another reason you saw miscellaneous revenue go down for the next 2 years is we found out we're budgeted at 500,000 and we only brought in 400,000 last year and we're tracking for 385 this year. So we're going to go ahead and lower that budget by 100,000 because it doesn't help us to have a budget in there that we're not going to be able to meet. What's kind of important to discuss are what are those things that we have not yet included. And the scheduled maintenance match, this one's of great interest to Eric because it hasn't been in the budget for 4 years because the state had eliminated it, so why would we budget a match? So we haven't worried about that. In between there, 0809 and 1314, we actually used our bond funds for the match, so that was wonderful and convenient, but our bond funds are now basically gone for Visalia. So there'll probably be a little gleanings that we can use toward that. We only have $1 million available in our other capital facilities fund, so we're not we're reluctant to use a whole $650,000 out of that and make it a match for this current year, or this upcoming year, 14-15. So we're probably going to have to look through either one-time dollars that fall at the end of the year or other facility funds, but the decision with our budget committee, really, we're not looking to put that in as a line item for 14-15 right yet. We don't really have the money there, so we're going to have to see whatever we can do with facility funds to gather up that and one-time dollars. So, and historically, it's only been about $200,000 or less a year, plus or minus. So in future years, we will have to build that back into our budget as a match. Also not included, there's some other, there will always be small fees that go up. What I try and do, and yeah, just a second, we scour the budget to see what other small fees might be going away. What can we lower? Yes? The state, it is a 50-50 match. So when the state says we're going to give you $650,000, we have to, or a one-to-one match, we have to pay $650,000. So, but I don't know how the state calculates it at their end. So we have an audit fee that's increasing. You heard probably about our student transit fee. We have these wonderful services with the Tulare County Coalition for bus services between Tulare, Hanford here, and the outskirts. But they came to us and said, we either have to end this program or we have to charge you more. So that's going to be $14,000 more from the general fund next year, plus most likely an increase in the student portion of the fee that's paid. And then there's two big pots that this is part of what senior management is wrestling with right now. We also have, in our resource allocation process, we have one-time dollars from above base allocations, which you might be familiar with, from our new resource allocation manual. And we just finished that process. The budget committee just went through scoring those and ranking those, sending them on to District Governance Senate, to the president, and then to the board. And there was $200,000 granted there. We also have the rest of our budget, which is our same budget that we move forward to the next year and then build in our assumptions or any reductions that we can make. But what else might change? You really have two things. You might have one ongoing base budget increases that are needed. You might also have ongoing staffing needs. FAWN is part of that, but there's also sometimes other classified or management requests. So that's part of what we're discussing right now. The physical therapy assistant program was built, but has no budget. It has no materials and supplies, travel conference. I think they have scraped up pennies from a few places for a few years, but there's a request to actually give them a simple budget this year. Office of Research and Institutional Planning was in response to our accreditation report and going on show cause. They said, you need this office and you need to staff it. Well, we've staffed it, but we didn't give them any budget. We gave them zero budget. So 14-15 is upon us. We have to come up with a budget for them. Marketing and advertising costs, we're discussing this right now. We used to have $50,000 a year for marketing, COS, and advertising. With budget crisis, we cut that to $25,000 a year. Do we want to increase that? If so, how much? Can we afford to increase it? That's some of the discussions. Writing Center, Tutorial Center, Math Lab, there's actually quite a few discussions because they have some of them. I think specifically I might get it confused, but the Writing Center and the Math Lab have gathered pennies from here or there or from that budget. They've never had an established budget. We need to gather up those things, establish those budgets, and see, are there some additional costs, especially with our accreditation findings. Do we need to offer more services, where and when? How do we pay for those? So ongoing new staffing, the FAWN, we have gone through that whole process with instructional counsel and academic services, posted and in the process of hiring. But classified or management, there are requests that come through program review every year or every other year, but now will be every year. What happens with that? We're discussing those in senior management right now with spring upon us, but really trying to look at the budget, and some final decisions won't be made until after the May revision, so we know better what our district budget is. Building a deficit into the funding. I just mentioned this as a possibility because I recently found out that maybe about half the other community colleges do that. They know the state doesn't fund us 100% of what they say they're going to fund us. Do you build a deficit in? What I prefer to do is assume that even though a deficit may occur in our revenues, some of our expenses are going to go unspent. And so I think you're safe, but that's just for your information. We do have $100,000 built in for 13-14, but for projecting out, we have zero right now. So our last assumption that might be of interest to you is, how do we receive our funding? We're a community college district. Primarily, we receive it on FTES, full-time equivalent students. And we have a newly formed enrollment management team that's trying to really monitor this and make sure we meet our targets. This year, a target of what's actually 9375, we put it at 9400 is very important for us because we receive an extra 1.1 million from the state because we're a mid-sized college, and we are because we reached this number. Used to be 10,000, they lowered it with all the restrictions in funding and enrollment. But if we don't meet that, then all those assumptions I just showed you go away and we have to knock off another 1.1 million. So this year during 13-14, it's very important to meet that. And this just shows you how are we going to meet that. We had 268 from summer 2013, 4474 from fall 2013. We're in the middle of spring 2014 right now. We're at 4141. These numbers are pretty good because all the students are enrolled. This number could be higher. We just used the prior spring. So when you look at that, if we get an extra 100, we even have that much more cushion if spring replicates fall. And then summer, this is our big push to fill classes in summer and have 600 FTESs. Very crucial because if we don't make our 9,400, we lose the 1.1 million in funding every year. That's not a one-year thing. So that's kind of an important assumption that we are a mid-sized college and we're going to remain at the funding level that we've been at. So that's something to share also as to how we build our budget. So that is all I have. Still got a voice. Any other questions, thoughts? I can go back to any slides. You guys are great. Thank you, because I know it's accounting and it's a little boring and numbers. And someone years ago started calling my world bean counters, and I was really offended by that. And then over the years, I've just adopted it. It's just, I've given in. I'm a bean counter. So I like to count all the beans and make sure I know where we are. And my job really is to make sure that we're fiscally sound, that we're safe going into the future, but also hopefully to take out, in this roller coaster we've been on, to kind of smooth that out. And when everyone else is saying the sky is falling, maybe say, wait a minute, look a couple years down the road, maybe the sky isn't going to fall. Or if they say we're flush with money, say, wait, look a couple years down the road, maybe we need to be just a little more conservative here and there. So hopefully I will be able to assist with that as we progress here at College of Sequoias. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.